Today I will be talking about clergy sexual abuse. The issue of clergy sexual abuse is real and relevant today. Awareness building is essential for prevention, awareness among clergy as well as awareness for and by the general population. Sexual abuse by individual priests is often varied, and the victims include both genders. Many organizational, psychological, and situational factors contribute to the susceptibility of individual priests to perpetuate abuse. It is important to note that no single cause of sexual abuse of minors by clergy has been identified. Several causes, or a combination of causes, predispose clergy to abuse. There are certain personality characteristics of clergy offenders which have been found through some psychometric testing. Priest abusers are likely to have experienced some of the following: poor relationship with their parents when they were youths, a history of sexual abuse, isolation, loneliness, insecurity, poor social skills, lack of identity, confusion over sexual identity, psychosexual immaturity, and substance abuse. The transition from seminary to parish life may also induce high levels of stress in some priests that can lead to a higher level of susceptibility to abuse. They may serve as stressors or triggers. Stresses in the life of clergy thus lead to reactive behavior to relieve stress. One of the ways is alcoholic abuse, which could in turn act to decrease inhibitions that allow sexual abuse or other abuses to occur. During the peak years of abuse, the use of alcohol and drugs by abusive priests increased significantly. It is to be noted that homosexual orientation is not a significant predictor of sexual abuse of minors. Some research maintains that clergy offenders display shyness, loneliness, and passivity. Offending clergy exhibited the presence of over-control hostility more than non-offending clergy. One specific clergy study found that offenders came from backgrounds characterized by rigidity and dysfunction, with themes of abuse, and they had little insight into these areas and had insufficient training in the issue of transference or countertransference, had virtually no training or education concerning sexual abuse, domestic violence, addictive disease, or healthy professional boundaries, and failed to appreciate how their history of trauma affected their professional life. There are many psychological tests which are done during the formative years of clergy. Priests who had abused minors cannot be differentiated significantly on psychological tests from priests who had not abused minors. Nonetheless, there were several personality-based risk markers on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory that merit attention. In clergy abusers, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory primary scales show elevations on the subscales of denial of social anxiety, authority problems, persecutory ideas, amorality, and over-control hostility. Risk markers include need for affection, social imperturbability, and inhibition of aggression. But these elevations need to be interpreted with caution, also clinically, and in a broad way too. Grooming behaviors are part of perpetrator behavior. Grooming behaviors are opportunities created by the abuser for the abuse to take place, such as socializing and building trust with the victim's family. And this is seen quite a bit in clergy offenders. They include disproportionate attention, enticements, games, seduction, verbal and/or physical coercion. They also include seduction or manipulation, building of personal and family relationships, providing benefits such as drugs, alcohol, and verbal or physical intimidation, seduction, and testing of a child. There may also be emotional manipulation and verbal coercion, and sometimes a victim may be caught by surprise. Very often, these sexual advances were disguised using alcohol and drugs. The reason why this abuse persisted in clergy and religious is because the accused priests claim that they were compelled by sick or sinful impulses, were controlled by forces beyond their control, and so denied full responsibility for their behavior. They often deny the victims his or her status by claiming that the victim participated by being seductive or precautious, or did not fight back or say anything during the abuse. And they even blamed the victim or the victim's family for setting up conditions that allowed the abuse to occur by inviting the priest into their home, engaging him socially, and including him as part of the family. They often downplayed the crime and explicitly blamed victims by placing the onus of the initiation of the physical intimacy on the accuser, referring to the abuse as a relationship. They said that the victims were willing or precautious and considered themselves the victims because they were accused of these indecent acts. They viewed the sexual behavior as consensual, not harmful, and that any behavior short of intercourse was not wrong because it was not sex. They also insinuated that a single incident of sexual behavior was not harmful and that only repetitive acts cause harm. Some even said that the harm should be forgotten because of the time between the incident or the incidents and the accusation. They also tended to explain their transgressions theologically. They had some definite theological misunderstandings. The priest abusers explained their identity in relation to acts of abuse by using the image of the sinner self. Their understanding of their sinfulness and the possibility of forgiveness and confession meant that the sacrament of reconciliation, their relationship with God, was restored, but without any reference to the victims. It is only many years after the acts of abuse took place that they came to understand the impact of their behavior on the victims. There was a cognitive dissonance that arose from the disconnect between the abuser's perception of norms of behavior, potential harms, motivations for their own behavior, and the reality and the impact of their behavior. Adapting by justifying or excusing behavior allowed the abusive behavior to persist. They also believed that seeking forgiveness from parishioners and victims and having completed some distinct punishment or treatment was enough to end the process of condemnation. Some priest abusers stopped because of internal reasons, that is, feeling guilty about their behavior, having a sense of remorse and shame because of their behavior. More reasons, like being removed from the parishes and situations in which they could abuse, are also reasons why they stopped. Others stopped because of a combination of internal and external reasons. Most of the reports and most of the studies state that the vow of celibate chastity was not the problem. So how can prevention and deterrence and treatment take place in clergy and religious? Prevention policies in churches should consider situational and social factors that could influence future harmful behavior, as new opportunities would arise over time and offenders could adapt and change their modus operandi. Some measures could be to increase the effort it takes for priests to commit acts of abuse by implementing mandatory safe environment training, to raise awareness among priests, and enforcing the zero tolerance policy for abusers, which would make the risk greater if one is recognized as an abuser. A periodic evaluation of the performance of priests so that questionable behavior could be more likely to be detected and controlled should be instituted. Priests should acknowledge the importance of structures of accountability and transparency, such as safe environment and audit programs. These should be implemented and maintained in a timely way. Priests should find alternate outlets for close and age-appropriate bonds, thus lessening the need for them to develop social bonds with adolescents or children. They should participate in priest support groups, which could decrease the likelihood of isolation and stress reduction seminars could help prevent provocations, especially after transitions. Excuses should be reduced through education about what types of behavior are and are not appropriate with minors. The ability to use techniques of neutralization should be removed, whereby excuses to justify inappropriate behavior are given. In conclusion, we should realize that priest abusers blame church leaders of the abuse and for them having to abuse, and how the church responded to the accusations. But actually, it was they who were responsible. They tried to shift the blame to the church hierarchy, saying how poorly church leaders prepared seminarians for life in the priesthood, and how ineffectively church leaders dealt with accusations of abuse, which they considered reactive and unforgiving. They felt they were poorly socialized to the life of a priest, and if they were better equipped to adjust to the loneliness and realities of the life of celibate chastity, they might not have abused. Therefore, changes must come from the leaders in the church, and the changes should be strongly implemented. Members of the churches should be assured that the church is committed to respond to all incidents of sexual abuse. Church members should be updated about steps taken to achieve changes through safe environment and audit programs, and through gaining a better grasp of the problem by commissioning studies about the sexual abuse problem. They should be informed about how the church has acted. This would help in greater openness. Transparency requires that the whole church community be engaged at all levels, including laity and clergy, to maintain vigilance in the prevention of the abuse of children.